Hey, well, welcome out to 242. Man, it's officially the first week of June, which for me, at least in Joel's book, means that it's officially summer in Michigan. Now, I'm about to say a bold statement, all right? So I need you to stick with me, okay? Maybe even, scare you off a little bit. You may disagree, but I believe we live in the best state in America. Hold your virtual applause. I believe that we live in the best state in America for 3 months of the year. All right, June, July, and August. You cannot beat a Michigan summer. Don't believe me, ask Kid Rock, all right? He will tell you otherwise, okay? Now, our other 9 months, I'm a logical person, all right? We can argue those. In California, you may win, but you cannot beat a Michigan summer. Don't believe me? Let me just sell you on this, all right? This is how we're starting church out today. We've got a hand signal, okay? You can tell me where you're going in Michigan, or if you're a real Michigan gangster, you can tell me where you're going up here even. We've got a slogan, Pure Michigan, and you've got to go Pure Michigan when you do it. I didn't grow up in Michigan, and so I remember hearing the commercial for the state of Michigan, and back in the day before it was even Pure Michigan, the slogan I would hear was "Say yes to Michigan." Say yes to Michigan. It was like a pushy drug dealer. It'd be like, just do it, move here now, you won't. And I honestly, my wife and I, we've lived here 6 years and we think we moved here because of God's call, but I will always wonder if I did not move here because I was bullied into it by Tim Allen on the radio. We'll just never know. But the truth about this summer in Michigan, as great as it is that the weather's getting better and that the water's getting clearer, the truth is it's gonna look different because we're coming out of what is a global pandemic. And guess what? Pandemics, they don't cooperate. And so it's possible that you're starting to ask questions about how this summer, how this next season will look. And so maybe you're saying, okay, well, how's it gonna look with my finances looking different? Or how's it gonna look? I know my kids' camp is canceled and their sports camps are canceled and that was my 1 week away. So how's summer gonna look different? In fact, it's possible you're asking this question right here. Now what? Now what? It's actually the name of this entire series because we know you're asking it. All right, restrictions are loosened, weather is better, but now what? Now what that my finances don't look the same? Now what that my trip is canceled? Or now what is the church going to look like? I mean, you would have to be living under a rock not to know that the president made some announcement that the churches can meet again. And so there's this debacle. Do churches open? Do they not? I know this is happening. I know this debate's happening because you've emailed me. Will the church open? Will it not? So let me just nip this in the butt up here today. Let me just solve this entire issue. Will the church open or will it not? The church, it never closed. The church, it never closed. Now, I understand that doors were locked, but I'm telling you, we are praying with wise men and women, with our elders, about when we reopen doors for thousands to gather in a single space, and we are considering that, and we hope you trust us. But just because doors locked doesn't mean the church isn't still moving. So now what? The church is gonna move like never before. Now what? I mean, Jesus still sits on the throne and it's gonna look different, but I actually believe it's gonna look more like the early church looked like than even it does right now, or even it did over the last years. In fact, we've seen over 600 people get in a small group over the last few months. Why? Because the church never closed. We saw dozens of people baptized and we have a baptism set up today. Why? Because the church never closed. We've seen new givers. We've seen hundreds of thousands of dollars given away and meals given away. The church is on mission now more than ever. So now what? We are going to continue on as the church of Jesus Christ. In fact, that's what this series is about. How do we look back to our roots of not just 242's roots, but the church's roots to answer the question, now what? So why don't you do this with me? Let me just show you a little bit of the church's roots. We've kind of put these into 3 different biblical categories with the Venn diagram, which is celebrate, connect, and contribute. Now, last week, if you missed it, go watch it. Kevin talked about the C of celebrate, what it means to celebrate God and to engage in a relationship with him. Today, I want to show you what church looks like through that second C, the C of connect. In fact, we believe you could have a next step to take when it comes to connecting with others and connecting with God. In fact, we actually have 9 next steps that we've identified. We understand there's more, but to help you be able to write this on a napkin. And the middle 3 are all about what would it look like to connect with others and connect with God. Why? We believe this is our church's roots, and we believe this could be what's next for the church. This could be the answer to revival in our campuses and in our locations, and it might have nothing to do with a building. So if you have your Bibles, let's get to the root of our church in Acts chapter 2, verse 42. Now, you may have caught that and been like, nothing gets past me. You just said 242, and you'd be right. This is not just the roots of the early church. This is where our church found its name, 242, this verse and ones to follow. And here's what it says right here. Acts 2:42, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Now, right off the bat, I have two words I want you to look at. The first one is that first word, they, okay? They, because who's they? I mean, we picked up right in the middle of a story, and whenever you're reading the Bible and you pick up in the middle, you've got to go back and find out who people are. Actually, the author's name's Luke, and he wrote Luke and Acts, many call it Luke Acts, so really we picked up like 24 chapters in. They is simply the early church. They is simply the early church. In fact, before the word church existed, they were known as the way. Why? Because they weren't a building, they were a movement. The second word I want to point out is devoted. They were all in for this movement. In fact, so much so that they devoted themselves to teaching, to fellowship, to prayer, to breaking of bread, which is the gospel. Here's what we see right off the bat about the early church is the early church knew God. The early church knew God. And this is where you should start as well. Man, if we're gonna start and be this movement of the gospel of Jesus, we have to start with knowing God. But here's the catch. I don't believe we end there. In fact, many of you have probably heard the word Christian described as this right here. Christian is someone with a personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Now, I wanna be clear, that is true, okay? I have a personal relationship with Jesus, and that is true, and that's where we start, but that's incomplete. I believe when it comes to the sea of connect, there is so much more that can define your relationship with Christ than just stopping at a personal relationship with him. I've heard it said once, it's like going to Disney World and you're in, so you stop at the door and you've got in, but you never explore what could be the fullness of actually church and Christianity was designed to be. So we see they knew God, but we see so much more. Let's actually continue on in verse 43. It said actually everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by these apostles. In fact, all the believers were together and had everything in common. So what we see next is fascinating because we see not only did they know God, they had everything in common with others. They not only knew God, they knew others. Now let's break this down. They had everything in common. Does that mean that they had the same hobbies or, I don't know, liked the same stickball team? I don't know what they played back then. Probably not. It means that they all knew God together, and this kept everything in common with them. They knew God and they knew others. So here's what I want you to do real fast at home. I had asked earlier, like, what do you want to do this summer in Michigan? Here's my next question. Who do you want to do it with? Who do you want to do it with? In fact, if you could write down 5 friends to share your summer with, who would they be? In fact, I'm actually gonna have you do this. Go get a piece of paper, go to your junk drawer, all right, that I know you have, you ain't fooling nobody. Get this piece of paper or take out your phone and get on the notes or Evernote or whatever and write down just your 5 closest friends. Now, I am gonna ask they're outside of your household, okay? So no dog or even spouse. My spouse is my best friend, I get it. Outside of your household, write down your 5 closest friends. And while you're doing this, which real fast, I can sense, I have the superpower, some of you aren't doing it. I'm serious. Go ahead and write down 5 friends. While you're doing this, let me explain. This is something psychologists, they've taught for decades, and it's that you are an average of your 5 closest friends. Pretty simple, all right? When it comes to your 5 closest friends, if you were to actually dig in, you would say, well, I'm not maybe the smartest in the group, but I'm not the least smart. I'm not maybe the most financially smart, but I'm not the least financially smart. You could go anywhere. Morally, if your friends party, you'd say, well, I'm not like the instigator, but I'm not the least either, and definitely spiritually. Man, I'm probably not the most spiritual. I may not have the best relationship with Christ, but I definitely don't have the worst. And so when we look at the early church and we realize that they had everything in common, this was part of the success because the average people around them were leaning them, taking them towards the same direction of mobilizing the church. And I wonder if you were to look at your 5 names, if you could say the same. or if it's not possible, that those 5 friends would be taking you in a different direction than the mission of the church. Well, we know that they knew others, but there's so much more to the story of the early church. In fact, let me just show you just in the next verse. Not only did they know others, verse 45, it said they actually sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Now, I don't know how we can even say this is possible in modern day church. Now, not that we wouldn't sell possessions. We serve a generous God, and I believe this church is very generous and the people in it. It's the second part. They had to tell other people their needs for other people to meet it. And I just don't see that happening nowadays. I see people rather you thinking who they want you to think they are than actually the truest version of themselves. And the early church opened up these needs that they had so that others could meet it. Here's what I simply see. Not only did they know God, not only did they know others, but they were known by others. And listen to me, this is a game changer. This changes the entire game because they were letting people into the darkest parts of their life, even where they had needs, and seeing them be met. And it was changing everything. And listen, this is the sea of connect. This is the sea that I believe could change everything for you. You see, I had you write down names, and there's a great chance that you did not write down 5 names, that you wrote down 2. Now, I don't have tapped into your Alexa in your house. You might be like, you just did a virtual magic trick. No, the reason I say that, and the reason that's more than likely, is that's the average that studies show that we have when it comes to friends. We have 2 close friends. Now, I'm not saying this is wrong, but it is alarming when we compare it to just 25 years ago, 2.5 decades ago, where the average amount of friends we had was 6. In fact, I bet if you were to ask your parents or grandparents, they've kind of had these close group of friends that they've always had and existed with, but something shifted, and there's actually an article by Psychology Today that said the shift that happened was the air conditioner unit, all right? Stick with me with this, all right? The air conditioner changed this for everybody because before we had air conditioning, everyone where they hung out were their front porches. And they would hang out and they would see kids grow up and they would see things happen, and the air conditioner unit was created and they retreated into homes. Then after that came the attached garage where you could just drive in, never had to see a neighbor. Then of course the attached garage opener, you're literally into your bat cave, never see anyone. But of course you could still call people, but then came the answering machine, so you didn't even have to answer it, you could just wait. And then ultimately came caller ID. I mean, this is gonna blow some of your minds, but there was a day where you didn't even know the phone number that called you. Right now, your iPhone says the phone, if you missed it, sorry about you. You just never knew, so you had to answer, but with caller ID, you could wait. But if you still wanted to be entertained, you had to go out and play with people outside. I know, also mind-boggling, but then came the invention of self-entertainment, Netflix, the iPhone, the iPad, video games, so that you can exist your entire life independent. And what I would argue is that as much as culture teaches independence, that independence is actually anti-church, anti-Christian. We were called to be dependent on God, and I believe dependent on other people. And culture has shifted and said, no, you don't need anyone. But when we take culture out of it and look biblically, we see a church that had a community that changed the course of history, that knew God, knew others, and were known by others. And here's what I truly believe. This early church community changed the course of history. And I believe the same could be true for you. In fact, if you're a note taker, here's really the main idea for today. You ready? You could be one community away from changing the course of your life. You could be one community away from changing the course of your life. You see, we mentioned that a Christian is someone with a personal relationship. But when I look at the early church, I don't just see Christians, I see disciples. And what a disciple is someone with a shared relationship with Jesus. This is entering into Disney World and seeing what all of the church has to offer. A disciple is someone with a shared relationship with Jesus. In fact, let's just look at the early church. Here's a list of what we just read that is the early church in Acts chapter 2. I mean, it says they gathered together in small groups, they ate food together, prayed together. They did life together, probably played some games, laughed, snacks. Snacks is a must. They talked about everything. They had the same goals and interests. They gave to each other in need, which means they talked about their needs and were willing to sell stuff to take care of those needs. They met in homes. They had sincere hearts. They met daily at school, at church, in the community. They praised God, and everyone liked them and was in awe. And leave that list up there, because my guess is if I were to ask you, hey, what is church? Your concept might just have been a few of these, a piece of this. And so when your piece, your partial version of church was taken from you, so did your entire concept of church fall. It was like a house of cards where when one card fell, the rest fell. When the truth is, church isn't a building. Church isn't something that COVID-19 can cancel. Church is a movement. And we will move forward in being the church, but it's going to happen through shared relationships with Jesus. And I'm telling you, you could be one community away from changing the course of your life. In fact, this partial version of church reminds me of a story I had growing up. Maybe you've even heard this story before. I was a pastor's kid, which means I grew up at the church. I was basically born on a pew, okay? And I remember my church had 2 services. I understand at 242 we have 107 services, but we had 2. And for us, what that meant is I attended one and served one. And I thought that's just what everyone did, okay? I mean, I was tricked into this. In fact, I thought leaving halfway through would be like treason. It's just like school, like you're out of the picture, never allowed to come back. And I met a kid in my Sunday school class, was maybe 8 years old, my attend service, and said, "Where are you serving?" And he said, "Nowhere." I said, No. That's not allowed. Where are you serving? And he said, "Man, after my attend service, I'm going home." And I was furious. Not at this kid. He's living the dream. At my parents, because they'd lied to me. And I thought I was, having to go to this full version of church when really there was a partial option. And as the story goes, I went up and stomped to my parents, and I was tugging on my dad's jacket, who is the pastor. He's probably like praying with widows, and he turns around and I act like I caught him. I'm like, "Did you know sometimes kids just attend part-time church?" Like I'd caught them. They still tell the story today. But the truth is, 8-year-old Joel was onto something. In fact, I would argue that not just kids attend part-time church, adults attend part-time church. In fact, most of the evangelical world attends part-time church. When we look at the early New Testament church, the way, the movement, there was a full version of church that was way more than listening to sermons like this, hearing bands like the ones we just heard, walking through doors and buildings like the one I'm in, taking a shot of communion and leaving. There is so much more to church than that, and it's possible you've missed it. In fact, it's possible you've stepped into church, but you're missing the fullness that it has to offer, and that you could be one community away from changing the course of your life. Now, why am I so passionate about this? I'm so passionate about this because this specific concept has changed my life forever. Just years ago, I was one community away from having my life changed. You see, when I was in seminary, I had something taught to me known as the pastor's mystique. And it's pretty simple. You can Google it. It means that pastors are supposed to keep this mystique that they're not normal people. And so if they hang out with normal people, they'll realize that pastors are flawed like everyone else. Spoiler alert, I was a man way before I was a pastor. But you're supposed to keep this mystique. And so my first years of ministry and our first year of marriage, we did this. And I remember like big events, New Year's Eve parties or Super Bowls, we would just spend it alone in our living room. In fact, I remember one, we got crazy. We drove to the local Buffalo Wild Wings and had a 12 count of honey barbecue wings. Can't handle the spicy stuff, all right? Like, woo, we were partying. Like that was our idea of this mystical church where you have to keep this concept when the truth is we're normal people and we needed to be involved with normal people. And it was actually this church, 242, who wants to look like a modern day church who helped teach us that. And I'll never forget when we were pushed to get into our system of communities around here, which is a small group. And so we did, and we were terrified. I mean, I'm just being honest with you. We had to email random people, and I'm a pastor at this church, okay? So you have a pass. And we had to drive to this address and knock on a stranger's door. Our first group, the name of this group, the leaders' names were Bill and Jessica Andrews. They still go to this church today. They're amazing people. And I remember we went in, we had snacks, we left our first group, and guess what we were thinking? Like, I'm serious. Like, we left and we were like, didn't change our life. But the truth is, it's not just one time. A community isn't gonna form on itself. It's being intentional time after time to see life change happen. In fact, that year we went to B-Dubs by ourselves. Let me just show you 1 year later. I'm not even kidding. 1 year later at the next Super Bowl, after we had joined a small group, here's a picture of us celebrating with a community. And actually, the story just begins here. This is now only maybe 5 years ago, this picture right here. From here, we actually decided to be apprentices and to multiply the small group, because when we look at the early church, they grew through homes. And so here's a picture a year after this, at the next Super Bowl, with a completely different group of people that we've multiplied. In fact, right in the middle of this picture in the red, you'll see Misha. Now, Misha is on staff at the Brighton campus here. And me and him decided to be leaders, and we multiplied this group. And we continue to see the church grow. And so let me show you my group that happened after this. Here's a picture of us at the Brighton campus on the soccer field after a service. And I wanna say the babies in the picture, I wanna say this was one of their child dedications, but I honestly can't remember. They will correct me on it, I'm sure, later. But those babies grew up in our group. In fact, this group began to grow. Here's a picture of one of those children right there. This is their 1 year birthday party. 1 year birthday party, look at our group growing. And here's a picture just to brag on how good I am with kids. It's very clear, as you can tell right here at baby Asher's 1 year birthday party. And this group got too big and we wanted to keep it intimate and connecting with people. So we multiplied again into what is our group today. This is actually our group last fall at a Brighton football game, because we live life together like the early church did, have things in common. We actually have members in our group who are Brighton High School coaches and living life together. Now, I've shown some pictures of us out. Here's what a typical Thursday night would have looked like at the Fireball household during small group. One of my favorite pictures on my phone right here. It's just shoes and mess and kids' toys. And guess what? If you knew us, we don't like messes and stuff, but this is a beautiful image of what community can look like that my wife and I had no idea we were missing. In fact, I think this is where most of the church is. They want to grow in material wealth, and all along they are relationally impoverished. I mean, I think of stuff that we thought we wanted, like we had this really beautiful nativity scene, and one time a kid in the group threw it and broke the ear off the donkey. And material wealth says, well, no, you don't want that. But relational wealth, we put that nativity scene up every year with that broken ear donkey, and it's one of our favorite images that we have. We were a community away from our life being changed, and we didn't even know it. In fact, our community has continued to meet through this. Here's us in a simple Zoom link during it. And here's even us doing a virtual game night right in the middle of all this. Why? Because we're a community who lives life through the messes, through the good times, right? We bring cakes to the celebrations and tissues to the hard times. And we have seen a modern day Acts chapter 2 church exist. In fact, at the closing of Acts chapter 2, this is what we saw in our personal small group. Acts chapter 2, verse 47, this is what it says right here. Praising God, remember this is they, and enjoying the favor of all the people, the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. The church grew, not in arenas, not in amphitheaters. The church grew through homes. The church grew through people who had stuff in common. The church grew over snacks and laughter. The church grew in a way that we aren't necessarily or haven't seen it happen in years, that I believe during this entire pandemic, we look more like the early church than we ever have. In fact, for my community, what we do is once a year between Thanksgiving and Christmas, we actually regather everyone and we have a festival. We call it Thanksmas. Here's a picture of one of them. We did a Hawaiian murder mystery theme for it. Here's another picture of one. This is like one of 9 tables that was in this house. There's actually over 100 people when you look at all of our living rooms that gather. I think we even got one more in our Christmas sweaters. And I'm not kidding you. Over 100 people, because these groups have multiplied. We don't know half the people at these because those groups have multiplied. And here's what, because of this community change in our life, here's my wife and I's new mission statement. We hope to impact more people through our living room than we ever do through stages. I'm actually gonna say that again because we have big stages at 242. I mean, we're one of the largest churches in the country, and still, we hope to impact more people through living rooms than we ever do through stages. Why? Because it's the model of the early church. It's a way that we connect with others and enjoy a shared relationship in Christ that has changed our life, has changed the early church, and I believe could change yours. From the bottom of my heart, I believe you could be one community away from changing the course of your life. And it could be messy, and it could be scary, and it could be letting people in, and it could be finding their dirt and finding yours, but you, believe me, will see strength and growth as you have things in common with these people, an average of these people, and you will see the church move. Now, you may be asking, okay, how do I do this? All right, I'm interested because I have the personal relationship. I've done the first C of celebrate, but I don't even know where to start when it comes to connect. I don't even know where it starts to entering into Disney World to see what else the church has to offer. And here's my one takeaway for you. Okay, you ready for this? My one takeaway. Take off your masks. Take off your masks. Now, you might have gone, okay, all right, Pastor Joel getting a little political on us up in here. I am not, okay? If you want to drive around with a mask on or not, if you want to be out in public with a mask on or not, I don't care, okay? I am not talking about that. In fact, I believe the church has been wearing masks way before COVID-19. I do. Now, these aren't physical masks. These are, of course, spiritual or even emotional masks because we would rather people view a made-up image of ourselves than who we actually are. And if we are gonna see community breathe life into us to enter a shared relationship with Christ, we've gotta take the masks off. We've gotta take the front off and be vulnerable and be open and watch your life change. In fact, as we've gone through this small group journey, here's what I've learned. People may be impressed by your strengths, but people connect by your weaknesses. Now, I'm preaching up in here and there's no one in this auditorium to amen me, so I'm gonna say that again through your video right here, all right? We may be impressed by people's strengths, but we connect by people's weaknesses. And if we could learn to be a church who looks like Acts 2, who can be real and open about our needs and open up and take off and throw away what people think about us to let them know who we actually are, I think we would see a connection that would lead to revival, that would change the areas we live in. You could be one community away from changing the course of your destiny. In fact, as I look lastly to the early church, I see not only did they know God and know others, known by others, but God added to their numbers, gave them their shared desires personally. I see lastly that they were known by God. The last thing is they were known by God. And what this tells me is this beautiful gospel message of God sending his son Jesus to messed up people so he could take their sin, their shame, and bear it on his cross and we would get his perfection. That this gospel message isn't just for individuals, that it's for communities. That the gospel isn't just for individuals, it's for small group, and the gospel is for the church, not buildings. The modern day Acts 2 church. That if we could step in, then this community could change the course of our lives. In fact, it could change the course of our church. And so here's what I hope you do. I hope you consider this. I hope you consider that you have the personal part figured out and that you're in, but you could be missing out on the fullness of church. And if that's you, we wanna get you connected. And here's how. Here's how you take off the masks. You can simply text "get connected" to 555-888. Simply text that simple word, "get connected." Take the bold step, and it will give you instructions to get involved in a small group around here, and just see if a community couldn't change your life. Now, I want to close with kind of one last story. Years ago in 2001, there was this family that bought a repossessed house. And so they bought this house and they walked in to find something horrifying. And it was actually a body. And next to this body was a newspaper that read 1997. This man had lived in this house 4 years and had passed away and not a soul knew. Not a friend, not a coworker, not even a relative. Nobody knew. In fact, as more data came out, they did find that this person was involved in a church. So I do believe with Jesus, he had the personal part, but I believe he had missed out completely on what was a shared relationship. And I wish I could go back and hear the story of this man and how he escaped into church and out like it's so easy to do, yet went without knowing others or being known. And I can't help but think this man was one community away from changing the course of his life. And I can't help but think you could be one community away from changing the course of your life. In fact, this isn't just in Acts chapter 2, this is all throughout Scripture. We call this one anothering. Let me just show you some of the biblical passages about what it looks like to be connected with one another. Look at this, John 13:34, love one another. Romans 12:10, be devoted to one another. Romans 12:10, be honor one another. Romans 15, accept one another. Galatians 5, serve one another. Do you believe me yet? Ephesians 4, be compassionate to one another. Ephesians 5:21, submit to one another. 1 Thessalonians, encourage one another. These are called the one another's of Scripture. Hebrews 10:24, spur one another on toward love. Man, that's a community that has everything in common. 1 Peter 3:8, live in harmony with one another. And 1 Peter 4:9, offer hospitality to one another. Listen, you could be one community away from changing the course of your life. And it might be messy and it might be difficult, but we serve a God who first got involved in our mess. And we could be missing out on the fullness of his design for you, the fullness of what his bride has to offer by getting connected in ways with others. And it could change the entire course of your life.